Take 4,895. Amber, try to get it right this time. We spent the majority of this week working on the motor mounts on extra parts, and we're making really good progress. But at the beginning of the week, we kind of got sidetracked a little.
We were on Facebook Marketplace in the morning, and that's kind of a bad idea because then you see all stuff that you want to buy, but you really shouldn't buy. But we came across this deal for a whole garage of stuff for a really good price. So we messaged the guy, and he was most interested in this welder that was included in the deal, thinking, you know, he could keep that and a couple other items and sell the rest of it to kind of get some of our money back. Well, the day before, it turns out that the lady gave the welder to a family friend, but they lowered the price accordingly, so we decided to go ahead and still go with it. And I am amazed that we got that whole garage into our small enclosed trailer.
This garage, I'm not kidding you, was the cleanest garage I think I've ever been in. We moved a bench that it couldn't have been moved in the last 40 years. And all we found under it were acorn shells from where the squirrels have been under there eating acorns. It was immaculately clean.
There's a lot of acorn shells.
There was a lot of really cool old knick-knack stuff. Like there was some oil cans, brand new oil cans with oil still in them. There was a bunch of AC Delco spark plugs, brand new, still in the box. Just a lot of really cool little knick-knack things like that were all in really good shape. I don't know if we're gonna be able to get our money back because I'm starting to want to keep more and more and more, but it just seemed like a good idea to go get it, and you don't come across those opportunities very often. After we got the garage loaded up and brought back to the house, we started working on the motor mounts for extra parts. And I am a MIG welder, like that's what I'm comfortable with. I've done a tiny amount of TIG welding, but I'm not real comfortable or confident in it. And I have a MIG or a TIG welder / arc welder. I don't have a MIG welder. So I had to make a decision, and I decided that, you know, when I was 16 was the last time that I can confirm that I did any arc welding, and I remember it being pretty easy. So that's what I chose to go with. Well, I got humbled. Arc welding is a lot harder than I thought it was going to be. I'm confident that everything is going to stay on there, but it sure doesn't look pretty. And if it falls off, I guess we'll weld it back on.
Roll footage.
Now that we got the lifters fixed on the 440 and got the cam degreed, it's time to start getting ready to put it back in. So in order to put it back in, we're going to fix the motor mounts. When I originally put that together, it was just basically throw it in there, get it running kind of thing. And now that I'm actually intending to take this and drag race it, I think it needs to be a better system that is, I mean, it wasn't going to fall out, but it can be nicer. So the first thing we're going to do is we're going to cut out the factory V6 motor mount on the passenger side, and what's left of the factory V6 motor mount, the makeshift small block motor mount, and then the upgraded makeshift big block motor mount on the driver's side. Once we get all that cut out, we're going to remove some of the structure for the suspension. If you look on here, and I've already got all that cut out, so kind of a preview. The upper control arm mounts on the top of this frame, and this is just a C-channel frame, not like they do on the new trucks today where they're boxed. So when the suspension compresses, it's possible that this is going to try to twist this upper frame rail. That's why that mount was here, to brace the upper frame rail. It's actually bolted into the back of the upper control arm mounts. So what I want to do is I want to plate this and box the frame just behind the control arms here. And then once I get that done, I'm going to set the motor in here and make my motor mounts, and they'll come off of that plate that I add here. Once I have that done, I'll know where my motor mounts need to be, and I can go back and I can reinforce this upper control arm mount to keep it from twisting under the weight of the truck. And then once I have all that done, I'm going to lighten up this front cross member. Two reasons we're going to do that. One, the weight. Two, this is going to be a drag and drive vehicle. So there's a chance at some point we might be dragging and driving and need to pull the oil pan on the motor for one reason or another. And right now, it is impossible to get the oil pan off this engine in the truck. So when we fix the cross member, we are going to create clearance to be able to remove the oil pan in the truck just in case we have to do some crazy maintenance on the side of the road somewhere during a drag and drive event. It's not that much work, it saves weight, and it could potentially keep us in a race down the road. Let me show you what we got. So on this side we have the stock V6 frame cross member piece. On that side we have a disaster, and I don't know, I do know. I'm the one that did all that, but I was in a hurry and I didn't really care, and now I'm caring. So we're gonna fix that. Okay, now that we have our plates that we're going to use to box the frame in the front here cut, I went ahead and I primed behind these just because I won't be able to get paint in there very well when I'm done. There was a little bit of rust, and I used, I don't know, some rust converting primer. It should be okay in there. Once I'm done, I'll paint everything, but that gets some paint in behind where I won't be able to reach later on. The way we're gonna place these is we're gonna get them square and parallel to the outside of the frame rail, and then measure off this rivet here in the radiator support cross member. Should be the same distance on both sides. It'll get them close. This isn't a suspension pickup point. It doesn't have to be exact, just has to be close. Okay, now it's tacked in. Time to see if I can weld. It's definitely not going to win no awards for welding, but I don't think it's going to fall off. Well, on the second try, I think the welds are looking a lot better, but as you can see right there, I've got a spot where I didn't get a crack quite filled, so I'm gonna go back and re-weld that. But other than that, I'm really happy with how this side turned out. It looks a lot better than the other side. Now that we have our frame boxed, we're ready to start building the motor mounts for the actual motor itself. And this is the factory Chrysler mount, Dodge mount that you can see here. And we're basically gonna replicate that, except instead of coming off at an angle and going down here, we're gonna build it so it comes kind of flat with the bolts there, so it'll be kind of this shape. And then we're gonna put a gusset on there and weld this spool so that it basically is right at the upper edge of this is where I measured it needed to be. And then once we have that welded on, obviously we're gonna cut this down. But we have these Jeep leaf spring bushings that fit right inside this pipe. And then 2 of those makes a spool mount. So the metal we're using for this is stuff that we got from a local fabrication shop. It's drops. When they're building something, they buy a full sheet and they cut this little piece off the end, and to them this is just scrap. To us it's gold. You can buy it at a much cheaper price than if you were to order custom cut pieces the size you need. Now that we have our piece of tubing cut, we can insert our bushings into the tubing with the metal sleeve in the middle. We have our motor mount piece. Now we just have to figure out exactly where we want it and make some braces to hold it. Have you ever had one of those moments when you're like, you know what? What did I get myself into? I thought, I'll arc weld it because that should be easier, right? Well, I'm pretty sure this is gonna, in fact I am sure it's gonna hold. I can see I got penetration all the way through this 3/16, so it's got plenty of heat, but man, that is the ugliest weld I think I've ever done. It's covered in slag, and I'm gonna have to get some type of heavy duty wire brush and try to clean this up, but I don't like it. It's not very pretty. And I can do a much better job with the MIG welder, but I don't have one. I would use the TIG welder, but I'm not confident that I can make the two pieces of metal stick together well enough to handle being a motor mount. I'm sure this is stuck together. I have no doubt that this is gonna hold, so we're gonna go with it. I'm gonna try again. I'm gonna build the other side, and hopefully it turns out a lot better. All right, we got both of our mounts done and bolted to the engine. It's time for us to set this between the frame rails. We're gonna hook it to the transmission, figure out where the placement of our front mounts goes. Now that we got the engine sitting there, it's still being held up by the cherry picker, but what we're gonna do is we're gonna make some brackets out of 3/16 plate that are gonna weld on here and gonna have a hole here. We actually need to move the motor over just a hair, about like that. All I'm gonna do is I'm gonna measure over, I'm gonna figure out this distance, and they're gonna come straight over, loop around, and angle down to the bottom here. We'll make 2 of those. When you're making stuff like brackets or tabs or different things like that, and you want them both to be the same, what I do, clamp the 2 pieces together, make them, and when you're done, you have 2 of the exact same.
And at this point in the week, we found another really good deal on Facebook Marketplace.
I'm really gonna turn off Facebook, get rid of Facebook Marketplace. I don't know, I gotta get rid of it or something. I found 2 72 Plymouth Scamp 2-doors not very far away that were mostly intact with engines and transmissions, and I had this bright idea, hey, we could do a will it run video and drive it home. So I contacted the guy, and he said, can't do it today, but if you come tomorrow at 5 o'clock after work, we can do this deal. And I'm like, awesome. So we got excited, we quit early, went and got the money out of the bank, and drove over an hour away to get these cars. And when we got there,
the address led us to a nice barbecue place.
It wasn't open.
Yeah, so we couldn't even get, and we weren't even thinking we should have gotten out and filmed a little bit there because it was a pretty cool looking place and they had this cool old looking truck sitting out front and everything, but there was no sign of the scamps.
So messaged the guy and nothing. I'm like, well, you know, maybe he's busy. Maybe he had to work late. So we waited 30 minutes, messaged the guy again, still nothing. And I said, Amber, message him from your phone. Maybe he's ghosting me for some reason.
He didn't reply to me either. So, and we decided to wait that long because, you know, we drove an hour away. It was a really good deal and we really wanted them. But
We tucked tail and drove home. No scamps. Sorry, guys.
back to the mount.
We got our brackets that go on the frame done. I'm really happy with how they turned out. On the second set, I took the time to shape them with the file before I started using the grinder, and I'm using a 60 grit flap disc on the grinder to smooth them out when I'm done. And it was easier to shape it with the file and then go back with the flap disc to smooth everything out. But if you take a look in there, you can see they fit really well. They're pretty tight, I mean really tight to the frame. The engine's hanging on the cherry picker right now. There's a ever so slight air gap on one or two of them, but that'll be filled in with weld. I'm really happy with how they turned out. So now the next step is we're gonna go ahead and tack weld those in. And then before I do anything else, I wanna go ahead and mount the brake master cylinder. We're getting rid of the brake booster because on this truck, the brake booster is almost touching the valve cover, and if I have to pull the valve cover off for any reason, I gotta disconnect the brake booster and lay it out of the way. And it's gonna be street driven, but it's mostly gonna be a race truck, so I'm okay with manual brakes. I am gonna fix the pedal ratio so that they work a little better, and we'll go in depth into that in a separate video. Actually, thinking about it, by the time you guys see this, you should have already seen the video on the brake pedal ratio correction. Okay, now that we got the motor back out, I am going to go ahead and weld these mounts up. As you can see, I knocked one of them off on the way out. I was afraid that was going to happen. So what I'll do is I'll weld the backside first, and then I'll bolt the motor mount in there, and that should line the other one back up. Plus I have the weld marks, and I'll get it close, and then I'll weld that one back on as well. The last thing we're going to do to the front end of this truck for now is remove the center of the front cross member and replace it with square tubing. And the way we're going to do that
is, let me grab the camera. So if we go over here and look, you can see the lower control arm mounts on either side. And they're kind of, if we get the top-down view, they're kind of towards the back here. So what we're going to do is we're going to cut this off somewhere in this neighborhood on both sides, and then plate the end of it, and then weld a cross member from this side to this side at the very bottom of the original cross member, and that'll give us a ton more clearance and should still support the suspension just fine. And the way this suspension works is it's all one cross member, and then it's got the coil spring bucket on the outside. So with that being welded in the center there, that should resist twisting and keep our front suspension in line. The way we're going to make sure we keep this all square is we've got a level. We leveled the front of the truck side to side, and then when we cut this off, we'll cut it until it's level up and down, and then we'll weld our plates in. Probably doesn't need to be perfect, but the closer I can get it, the better it'll be. Well, it'll look anyway. And then the last thing I have to do is I'm going to take some measurements, probably from this bolt hole to this bolt hole, and make sure I maintain that on the frame rails. It's got a cross member right here, so I don't think it's going to move. I'm going to get started. Missed by a little bit, but that's okay. You can see we got a little bit of gap up here. I cut the bottom exactly where I want it, so I'm going to have to trim this off. I'm going to have to cut this off, but I'm just going to make it perpendicular to the ground. Once it's all nice and flat, then I'll be ready to go ahead and weld my plates on there. I missed quite a bit worse on that side, but I got, if you look in here, this spacing here is what I wanted to keep. That box that's around that lower control arm. Once it's boxed in, I wanted to keep this piece here about that thickness, and it's the same on both sides. I have a plan. What we're gonna do is, you can see I've already started on this side. There's nothing out here, there's no need for any of this anymore. So we're gonna cut the top on both sides. I just V'd out a piece there. I'm gonna push this back, I'll push this up, I'll weld it here and here, then I'll flatten this out, put my plate on here. My inspiration is I have that 2004 Dodge pickup. The transmission cross member is basically a piece of square tubing that has some spacers in it so that it doesn't collapse, and then it just fits inside of a U on the frame and has a bolt front and back. So I'm gonna do the same thing here. I'll build my U bracket wherever I need the cross member to be, which is probably gonna be a little bit in front of this after this is all plated,
and I'm going to hang the cross member an inch below where the original cross member was, because the oil pan actually sits below the cross member in this truck. So once I get that in there, I'll get some pipe and put some pipe inside my cross member so it doesn't collapse, and I'll just put 2 bolts here and 2 bolts on this side, and then the cross member will be done. Now the hang up. My welder doesn't reach, and I've got the truck jacked up, and you can see that that cross member is integral to the rigidity of the front end of this truck. So we're gonna have to break here. I'm gonna have to go get an extension cord, and then the next thing we're gonna do is finish this side, get that side done, plate the inside, and then we need to actually set the engine back in so we can get our cross member placed so that it doesn't interfere with the oil pan it's currently at.
We were hoping to get a bit further this week, but you guys know what the plan for next week is, assuming we don't get distracted by Facebook Marketplace again.
See you soon.